Okay, so the warm-up says, state whether or not you can use the following information to prove two triangles are congruent. So, is there such a thing as ASA? Yes, that's just angle side angle. Good. Number 2, SSA, is that a thing?
No.
No. There's no such thing as side angle. What about number 3, SAS?
Yep.
Yes, that would be side angle side. Number 4, SSS? Yeah, side's a thing. Is angle side a thing? And angle. No, so the no's are 2 and 6. The rest are yeses. There's one that was left out. Anyone know which one?
That ASS.
Well, that's here in reverse. One of the actual ones that was left out.
ASA.
HL.
Yeah, there is no HL in here, but remember that's the 5th one. There are 5 ways. 4 of them are on the board, plus the hypotenuse leg that we learned on Thursday. Any questions so far? Alright, I'll be around to get those warm-ups in just a second. Here is what we are starting today. We are starting section 5.5. It's all about congruent triangles. So we're going to do a few different types of activities. You'll see them on the homework. It all relates to congruent triangles. It's sort of taking everything you've learned so far and putting it together. Our notes today, we're actually just going to look at 2 proofs. Again, just to sort of see how all these things tie together. The main thing we're talking about today is the objective that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So go ahead and get that down and then we'll get rolling. We only have one more section of notes after this one for section 5. Then we'll do some reviews, notebook quiz, test, and all that end of the chapter fun stuff. Any questions? Alright, so this is basically like the main gist of these notes today. That corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So we're going to look at a few proofs that involve this. Then we're going to look at a few other types of problems. But it all goes back to the fact that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So you can shorten that up just by saying CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And then you should already know this, so you don't really need to write it if you don't want to. You can if it makes you feel good. But remember that the corresponding parts or the angles are the sides that match up. So if they're congruent to one another, they're corresponding parts. We actually started the chapter talking about this when we were saying like angle A is congruent to angle D and angle B is congruent to angle E. Those are all corresponding parts, so this should not seem too new for you. Now we just kind of have a fancier abbreviation for it. So CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So here's a quick proof that we're going to look at that shows you how you can use the fact that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. You don't need to write this one down in your notes. You can just follow along. Remember we talked about proofs a couple weeks ago. A proof is just a series of arguments that take you from point A to point B. So you always start with a given. Here's the information that we're given on this one. So we know a little bit about there's a bisector, so CD bisects BE. That's going to be important. We also know that AE is congruent to BC and that AB is congruent to CD. So those are all the things that were given, and our overall goal is to prove that BE is congruent to DE. So that's where we're going to start. This is where we're going to end up. And remember, there's always 2 columns in the proofs we're going to do in this class. The column on the left are the things you know. The column on the right are the reasons that you know it. So how do I know that AE and BC are congruent and that CD bisects BE? How do I know all those things? They were given. Good. Now I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. We also know this. This wasn't listed yet. Do you see that on any of the steps?
Yeah.
Which step?
Well, I mean,
4. Okay, so I'm just going to jump down to 4. I'm going to put given right away, just so I don't forget where I found that out. Okay, it was given to me. Alright, so I know about the bisector, and I know that AE is congruent to BC. So that's what I know so far. Alright, so the next step says that BC is congruent to CE. How would you know that BC is congruent to CE? Does this word mean anything to you? Yeah, anytime something is bisected, how many congruent parts are made? 2. So, the reason that these two are congruent is because BE was bisected. So that is actually the definition of bisect. It means to make 2 congruent parts. So that's how I know those 2 things are congruent. Alright, so I know that AE is congruent to BC. And now I know that BC is congruent to CE. So now they're saying, well, let's cut out the middleman and go AE to CE. Do you guys remember what property that's called when you cut out the middleman? It's like first semester stuff. I'll help you refresh your memory. That's called the transitive property. So because of the transitive property, we know that those things are congruent. So I now know that AE and CE are congruent. Again, the transitive property, I just cut out the middleman of BC. They were both congruent to BC, so they're congruent to one another. Alright, now I'm talking about AB and CD. Alright, and that was given to me. The next thing says that these are right triangles. How do I know that they're right triangles? What makes these right triangles? Yeah, they have this little square. Okay, so I'm just going to say they have right angles. Alright, so if there's right angles, and then we could also put something fancy like C diagram or something like that. But if they're labeled with those little boxes, that means that they're right triangles. The next thing that we have over here in our statement column is that triangle AEB is congruent to triangle CED. So look at each of those triangles. How do I know that they're congruent? They're right triangles. AE goes with CE. AB goes with CD. So I know they're right triangles. Do I have a set of legs that are congruent? Do I have hypotenuses that are congruent? So what theorem is that? There's 5 over there on the board. Which one do I have in this example? It's the oddball. Nope. HL. This is a hypotenuse leg. Alright, and I know that because they're right triangles. Now, once you prove that the triangles are congruent, you know that all the corresponding parts are congruent. So BE and DE are corresponding parts of congruent triangles. So that's the reason that they're congruent. So we can shorten that up with saying CP, C, T, C. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles, congruent. What are your questions? It's kind of a lot. We're only going to look at 2 and then we're going to jump into homework. Are we good on this one? So I'll give you some time to write this. I want everything that's on the board in your notebooks. This is the only example that I'm requiring you to write today. instead of leaving the blank like this, where it's like a blank and a question mark, just write number 1 and don't put anything, okay? Because we're going to end up filling those in as we go. Number 6, I'm going to shorten up for you. I don't know why it's written out in words when we just learned an abbreviation for it. So instead of writing that, you can write C, P, C, T, C. Corresponding parts, congruent triangles are congruent. All right, so I'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes to write these down. And then we'll go through step by step and see if we can fill in the missing information. And then I'll go ahead and give you your homework. Alright, so as you're finishing up writing, I want you to sort of plan your attack. That's how you have to do these proofs. See where you start, see where you want to end up, and then see if you can sort of make a game plan from there. So, we are first given some information about a bisector. Bisector always does what?
FH. Give it HS. FH.
This part right here?
No, wait.
Number 1?
Yeah.
Oh, so you're saying how do I know about the bisector? It's given? Okay, good. You're even a step ahead of me. Okay, before we fill anything out though, I just want to talk about like where are we going to go with this information? So something being bisected usually gives us what? 2 parts that are congruent. Okay, so we're probably going to have a little bit of that. Parallel lines, we have 2 sets of parallel lines. Usually parallel lines give us like alternate interior angles or corresponding angles or something like that. So this information is probably going to give us some angles that are congruent. This information is probably going to give us some sides that are congruent. I'm assuming eventually we can prove some triangles congruent, and then by corresponding parts we can end up here. So that's sort of the game plan right now. Everybody think we can handle that? Okay, so we already did step 1. That information was given to us. So I know that we have a bisector because it was given. The next step talks about 2 segments that are congruent. That's typically how a bisector works. So if we have a bisector here, this segment is bisecting this one. Alright, the next step tells me that these 2 are congruent. Seems logical. So I'm going to go ahead and label those on my diagram just to help me out in the future. And the reason is that we had a bisector. So this is the definition of bisect. Bisect means to create 2 congruent segments. Okay, after that it looks like we're going to the rest of the given information. So I'm just going to copy this stuff down, the stuff about the parallel lines. That's what I know for step 3. Alright, that was given. Now, parallel lines usually give us some information about some angles. So let me trace the ones that are parallel. The ones that I'm tracing in green are parallel to one another. The ones that I'm tracing in red are parallel to one another. Alright, then they tell us that angle F, that's this guy right here, is congruent to HGK. Okay, so those 2 match up. Also, that FGJ is congruent to H. So focus in on one of the colors. Let's look at the green ones first. The green ones are parallel. And they're actually the reason that we know these that I marked with 1. Do you guys remember what kind of angles those would be called? They're sort of like in the same position when it's cut by this guy, FH. They're both like to the bottom right of our transversal, FH. Do you remember what that's called when they're in the same position? I'll give you some options. Alternate interior? Alternate exterior? Same side interior or corresponding? What's it called when they're in the same position? Corresponding. These are both examples of corresponding angles. So I'm just going to say corresponding angles congruent. Those are tricky. I think the parallel lines in these triangles are the hardest ones to pick out. Alright, looking at the next reason, it's giving me one of my triangle congruence postulates, angle side angle. So I should probably say something about the triangles that are congruent. Which triangles are congruent here?
Triangle.
Name the two triangles. F, G, J. Congruent to...
G, K, H.
Careful, you went F, then G. So you need to now go in the same order. So you'd go G, then H. I'm missing something over there, sorry. So you'd have to go G, H, then K. And then the final statement is always, what were you trying to prove? What was I trying to prove? Angle J is congruent to angle K, and that's because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are always congruent. Now, as you're finishing this up, you will be happy to know that your homework is not this difficult. Your homework sort of focuses on a few skills that you'll need to know when you go do these proofs on your own. So it's more like isolated steps, but I did want you to see sort of how the whole picture will come together. So that's why we looked at these proofs. Do you have any questions on these proofs? Alright, I'm going to give you your homework, and we're going to do the first one from each section just because it is so different from the notes, and then you have the rest of class to finish it. Alright, we are going to do the first one from each section together on the board. So number 1, you are given 2 triangles, and we're supposed to name 3 pairs of corresponding sides. That is like pretty much exactly what we did in section 5.1, so that should not be difficult for you. Can someone give me a pair of corresponding sides? JK goes with which one?
RS.
RS, good. Another?
JL goes with RT.
JL, congruent to RT, wonderful. Last one?
KL goes to ST.
Very good. Alright, so that's 1 and 2. 2 is just the angle, so you can go ahead and do that one on your own. Number 3 is kind of tricky. We have not seen a problem like this before. But number 3, I'll just sketch it for you on the board. It looks something like this. And it says, to sketch the overlapping triangles separately and to mark all congruent sides and angles. So you're going to take the triangles, you're going to pull them apart. What are the 2 triangles you see up there?
3.
Well, yeah, there's 3 triangles, but the 2 that are congruent.
1.
M and P, that's one of them. So sketch the first triangle. So I just took the M and P and I just sort of, like wrote, see how like each one of them went? Okay, now I'm going to take the other one. What's the other triangle that's congruent to M and P? We're just peeling them apart. Do you see how you can have like NP again, but now you can go up to O?
Yeah.
So ONP. So you're just taking the 2 that were overlapping and you're pulling them apart. So again, like the N goes there, and then the P is down there, and then the O. So just visualize like you had two and you just like grabbed each corner and pulled. Now, the tricky part is labeling what's congruent. So do you see how M and O were congruent? Go back and label them how they were labeled. And ONP matched up with MPN. So now I'm going to go and label those. Now, there's one piece that you might not catch. What segment was the same when they were together? Yeah, NP. So when you pull them apart, it should still be congruent. So just label N and P as congruent. So again, those are kind of tricky. You're just taking the two triangles, you're peeling them apart, and then telling me what you know. If you need help on those, you have two more in that section, just let me know. I can come help you with them. Some people find it easier to trace them before you separate them. If you want to use like a colored pencil, that might help. So if you wanted to start by tracing one and tracing the other, that might help too. Alright, so give those a shot. Jump down to the next section, number 6. Number 6 says, tell which triangles you need to show are congruent in order to show that the congruent statement is true. So basically, like if we were doing a proof, what would be the second to last step? So what triangles would you show congruent? So what are the two triangles in that diagram that are congruent? Well, the first triangle looks like ABC, right? So ABC would go with which triangle? A goes with what? D. B goes with E. And then C goes with F. So again, just basically like what two triangles are you showing are congruent? Alright, number 8 takes it a step further. It's saying, well, how do you know they're congruent? So tell which triangle congruence postulate or theorem you would use to show that PS is congruent to RS. So basically, before you would use corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, how would you prove they're congruent? So number 8, they're both right triangles. SQ is in both. And then it looks like we have some hypotenuses that match up, PQ and RQ. So what postulate is that? It's actually a theorem. What theorem is that? HL, very good. And then number 11 is actually a lot like number 1, but instead of triangles, it's like sails to a sailboat. So you're just matching the corresponding sides. So we would say like AB is congruent to DE, BC is congruent to EF, and finally CA, bless you, is congruent to FD. Alright, I'll leave those up on the board. If you come across any questions, let me know. Like I said, this isn't really exactly what we did in the notes. It's sort of like steps you might see in a proof in the future. So the notes were kind of the big picture. These are kind of the small steps within the picture. So let me know if I lost you anywhere. I can come around and help you. But these are due the next time I see you, whether it's Wednesday or Thursday of this week. Make sure you finish this and be ready to start section 5-6. Any questions?